I want to acknowledge that we're upon unceded and attested, specifically Musqueam territory of the Coast Salish peoples, and I really am grateful that I've been able to be here as a visitor for the past 15 years and serve communities. It's a privilege, and it's been really nice to be welcomed into the communities that are based here. There's 5 things that are universal for healing everywhere in the world that I've traveled. Every culture has singing. Every culture has some sort of movement or dance. Every culture has rituals, prayers, ceremonies, meditation. Every culture also has storytelling or theater. And the last one, which is the most important one, is our connection to nature and the land. It's kind of, I've got all these different things. One of my mentors came here and spoke a little while, Dr. Beth Hedva, really amazing. I met her 19 years ago, and we met and we're just like, yes, I see you. And I was like, oh, thank you. Beautiful. And so she's informed a lot of my practice and the work that I do. So I want to acknowledge Beth. She called, I love her intuitive sense. She called this morning. She's like, I was thinking about you. And I'm like, I'm just running out the door. And she's like, so she sends her, hello, greetings. So when I met with Bruce, he said, you should tell all of those stories. I'm like, well, there's not enough time, Bruce. And I think we were meeting for an hour, and it was a 3-hour meeting. And so I want to sort of put things into perspective. This afternoon, I'm going to be talking about reconciliation and healing. But this morning, I want to talk about my spiritual path and what I've learned to share. And it's really beautiful to hear, as I've read about this place on how you understand each other as beings, as intuitive beings of love and light, because that is the truth. Years ago, I was traveling, I'd gone to university. My parents were like, if you give us a university degree, you can do whatever you want. And so I bought a plane ticket and left, and traveled for very, very many years. And I didn't know what I was getting myself into, but the doors that opened for me, as I was living in Nepal, ended up there for a couple of winters, living there and studying with all these healers. And I didn't have the capacity to even understand what I was witnessing. One of them was one of the 13 indigenous grandmothers who recently died, passed on, who used to bite and suck illnesses and entities out of people. And I remember that was my first, what? What am I witnessing? And I witnessed enough over the years to understand that there's other possibilities and ways that we exist with each other and ourselves. I also realized how a lot of us have lost our way in that place of connection. Around that time during my travels, I was happenstanced. I have a friend who's from Borneo, and his father is a medicine person, and when the scientists and ethnobotanists went to go hang out with him, and they said to him, how do you know you've got thousands of plants that go together? How do you know which ones go together? And he laughed, and and the translation came across as, if the plants harmonize, you're going to make a medicine. If they're not in harmony, you're going to make a poison. And that, at that time, I was in my 20s, and I couldn't really comprehend what they were saying. But of course, as I bumbled along my path, I love saying, I'm the bozo on the back of the bus, I'm just along for the ride. And it was like that for a lot of years of witnessing really profound shamanic healers and being able to enter into those spaces and just to have my own holy shift. As my friend Joe Lukey, who's a Voodoo priest, would say, he used to have a blog, and it was called The Holy Shift. And which I was like, I love that. And he's like, it's time. I think we're living in a time of high paradox, where there's such extreme disharmony. There's such extreme suffering in the world. And yet we are continuing in this place in which it's out of control. So climate, the environment, et cetera, And there's a couple of things that I was thinking about, and this has sort of been in the leadership practice. There's things that separate us: shame, blame, fear, and guilt. There's probably a lot more, but I'll start with those. And really, I see they came out of indoctrines, and I just want to apologize right now in case I offend anybody. I'm going to say that now so that I can say everything. Is that those places of shame, blame, guilt, fear keep us separated. They keep us separated from each other, from ourselves, and from the Creator. And in my years of learning and sort of going down the paths that I went, I just realized how much we've been indoctrinated, and not only just in our growing up, but we've inherited beliefs and customs from our ancestors. We hold the cellular memory. They now have, science has said, so it must be okay. Science has said that we are, we have this genetic intergenerational trauma. We all carry it, some more recent than others. We all know that we've lived lives where we've experienced life in some very difficult ways, some of us not, but we all have different experience of that. We also have our interesting opinions and ideas that we have about each other. These are the things that keep us separated. And so in the work, as an Indigenous person, I'm also adopted. I was part of the 60s scoop. So I didn't grow up in my culture, but I had all these really weird intuitive gifts. And my parents, who were British, I would tell them things and they would be like, "Oh, what is she talking about? Just ignore her." So they kind of kept me in the corner. They didn't. Really lovely parents. But as I started exploring the worlds around myself and understanding that there were more things, not things that just go bump in the night, but there was an expansive universe. And the intelligence of the universe is what I really like to use for the God speak. The intelligence of the universe can hold the space for the good, the bad, the ugly, and the beautiful. And that place of judgment that we hold perpetuates that place of separation. So that's kind of a big sort of overlay picture, but really in my work, when I moved here 15 years ago, you have to forgive me, I kind of go over, but don't worry, I'll bring it back in, I promise. When I moved here, when I met Beth Hedva 19 years ago, I also met a medicine man who works with Indigenous cultures who haven't lost their pre-Columbian spiritual teachings, which is kind of impressive. So they use psychotropic plant medicines. I'm like, "Bruce, is it okay that I talk about that?" And he's like, "You should talk about that." And so they use plant medicines that help them in the ceremonies connect beyond the ego. What I realize is that plants do not have an ego. They're not trying to tell you what to do or how you should heal. The plants come from a place that are from the intelligence of the universe, and they help us move past our limiting ideas, beliefs, and thoughts. The stories that stick to us, that stick to our hearts, that stop us from hearing and seeing. And so when I moved here 15 years ago, I was kind of like, okay, maybe I need to do a master's degree because I just don't want to have to pay for a piece of paper so I can be part of a club. But I'm just like, there's no course. There was nothing I wanted to study. And at the same time, this other door opened up for me to do a 5-year ceremonial apprenticeship with Indigenous cultures from down in the global south. And that began a real deepening of what I understood and deepening my leadership work out in the world. And then with Beth Hedva also on the other side, who trained me in a sort of a Western psychological model, who's also, very gifted in her intuition, it all fit. And so it's a really unique formula to be able to perceive the world and think about, how do we decolonize things? How do we decolonize on the way that we act? And when I say this, I know that it's different in this church, but how do we decolonize the way that the governance comes from this into that we are all together and truly all to that? We've all been indoctrinated into obeying because this is how it is, but it's like, it's not working. We're seeing that. And so in this walk, I started to realize when I heard that story about, with my friend's dad who said the plants sing. Many years later, I'm in the Ornoconon Basin in Venezuela. I'm with the Piare people, and I'm working with this this man named Jose Luis, and Jose Luis is teaching me how to make medicines. He doesn't speak English. I do not speak his indigenous language, or I don't speak Spanish. A couple of words, but not enough to have a conversation of this level. And he was explaining to me, and I don't understand this part, I'm not going to go into there. He was explaining to me how, I asked him, Jose Luis, how do these plant medicines go together? And he said, because they make music. And he said, because these songs, listen to the songs. And I was like, like I did 20 some odd years ago, I was scratching out my ears being like, I can't hear the plants sing. Which is interesting because I do an activity with people, and you get blindfolded. You're lucky today it's not going to happen. You get blindfolded and you go on a walk into the forest for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and they take you to a tree and you connect with that tree with your blindfold on, and then you're taken back a different path, and because the tree sings a song, and then you're let loose with your blindfold off to go find your tree, and the person follows you. It's interesting when I ask people, how do you know? What is it that, how did you know? And a lot of people will be like, well, it was like this, and it had branches. And I'm like, yeah, but there's thousands of trees in the forest that have branches and are about that size. And so I explore that with people. It's like, what is that? How do you know? Where does that come from? Larry Mulikoff, who is an Aleut elder up in Alaska, was talking about going fishing for seals. And when they cut the hole in the ice and everybody's sitting around and talking, and he said, and probably a minute or two before the seal would come up in the ice and you can't hear anything, everybody would go silent every time, and then they would have a seal. And he said to the elders there, he said, how do you know? And there, it was like, what do you mean, how do we know? We're connected. And I think about that, and I think about the displacement of the pain and the suffering and the paradox that we live in is a lot of disconnection. Is a lot of disconnection. And a place of which we suffer from trauma is that place of disconnection. We live in a very cognitive world. Our education system is, this, and it doesn't teach us to be here in a place in which we can listen. We all have empathy. We all have all of these gifts. They're not relegated to, I don't know, I was watching I don't have a TV, but a psychic long medium, like being able to communicate in other ways. Even the gentlemen who live in those indigenous places where they're connected, we all have the ability for those gifts, but they've become dormant in our domestication, in the place. And yet, we all have the ability. And so a lot of the work and my understanding is that the more that we heal, the more that we are let go of our interesting biases, and the more that we can feel and empathize and see. I mean, for everybody here who's a parent, when your kid is sick, you can feel it. That's the place, that place. Or when you're thinking about somebody and the phone rings and you're like, I was thinking about you for the past 2 weeks. That's really weird, but it's actually not so weird, And so there's a place on that I'm like, that's the exploration of how do we be connected? How did Lamudoka, how did she bite and suck things out of people, illnesses? I mean, I can't explain that. It's not up to me to explain. That's her special gift, And I look at those places and I'm like, there's a lot of wonderment that I have. There's a lot of wonderment that I have. And there's a place in which we have forgotten those teachings. So the word indigenize comes from a Potawatomi teaching. That's my culture. And it's about two-eyed seeing. And it's about looking into the future, but also looking into the past. So the wisdom of our ancestors, which are actually held in our body, in our cellular memory. Last year, I was at a talk with an Kwakwaka'wakw elder, Adam Dick, who is an amazing man. He wasn't raised in his community. He didn't go to residential school. He was raised by the elders in the bush. The ancestors came to his mother and said, you will not raise this child. He will be taken at birth and raised in the forest. So really phenomenal to have somebody that's a living embodiment of that in today's world. And Adam said, And I was like, oh, thank you. He said, I was raised with the traditional teachings. What you don't understand is that you have the ability to tap into those teachings. And it really just made me go, it's so true. We're always measuring ourselves towards each other or from our society. And it's a waste of time. As you get older, you move away from that because it's like, who cares? It's a waste of time. But there's a level of that in which, how can we perceive and really elevate and get things to wake up, people to wake up, our society? How do we get people to do the right thing? What I've understood is leadership is doing the right thing from here, right? It's knowing what's right. So we're seeing in a time of this paradox, we're seeing a lot of this pushing back and forth. This past week with the Wet'suwet'en Nation, with my friends up there, we're seeing people, and the way that we've framed things is a lot of blame and judgment. Oh, those protesters or all those people, I'm like, but what about protecting the land? Because really that's the sacred. I was working in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I was pulled before the head of the Catholic Church in South Kivu, and these formidable Catholic priests were like, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm teaching trauma through a healing lens. And they said, well, what does that mean? And I was like, oh. So this comes from Hunter S. Thompson, Thompson Highway, sorry, not Hunter S. Thompson. No, definitely not. Thompson Highway. And he said this, he said, in one worldview, there's a story about a man and a woman named Adam and Eve. And the priest said, this is true. And I said, yes, but in another worldview, we don't have that story. We were never kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And then they switched from French to Swahili, and then they said, well, what are you saying? And I said, well, the Creator has given us all of these medicines. And when I'm working with the people are saying, oh, that's witchcraft. But people don't have access to medicines, and they're paying money that they don't have to get outdated Western medicines. And yet this is the pharmacy. And I don't understand why you have all these teachings that don't allow people to, why people aren't accessing what is free, what is given. And they were like, yes, you need to go and teach this, You need to go and teach this. And there's teachings that have been lost, and this is where this is one of those moments where women held reproductive rights and knowledge, and it's been really lost there. It's been lost here a lot too. And I was visiting a community, a village, and the doctor who I was waiting for to take me on the tour around the village was late, and there was a woman who was having a miscarriage. And he said, oh, sorry I'm late, there's nothing I can do. And I said, oh, that's too bad. He had nothing to help her. No, pads or, nothing to help her pain. We walked outside, and growing right behind the clinic was the plant that the Mayans use for hemorrhaging and reproductive. I said, well, come on, get the water on. Let's make her some tea. And it helped her. It saved her life. And the doctor looked around at the forest, and I said, Allah, your pharmacy. It's simple. The Creator has given you this. And so it was really amazing. So that those holy shifts, right? Those holy moments of oh, we forget about that place of connection. So when I think that we can't even hear the plants sing, a lot of times we can't even hear ourselves, let alone our relationships. When I look at the world and I look at the relationships that we have, there's something that's been forgotten. And that's a place of deep listening. And this takes a lot of self-awareness. Meditation helps, singing, dancing. You know what you feel like after you sing. You can feel the energy. When I walked in this morning and there was a really awesome rocking song happening, and I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. That is spirit incarnate. I don't understand why we live in a world of so much destruction when there's so much ability for beauty and creativity. Why we're choosing this other path. And so that's the piece in which I think about, and which I say, which I hold, is how do we hold that space for ourselves and each other? Beth Hedva said, Kim, we need to learn to be with ourselves, letting others be with themselves, letting go of the issues that bind us. And that's a big one, because, I kind of grew up with, that's not right. that's not right. Don't do this and don't do this. And I was like, how do we hold the space for all of it? It's a big conundrum. There's a thing that I see that's missing in some of the dominating cultures, which is, again, shame, blame, fear, guilt, into, and we know that the churches way back then became a form of governance for communities. I know we have to wrap it up. Your time's coming. And so we've forgotten the spiritual teachings. And yet we all have these dormant teachings, and some of us are more aware and open in those teachings, and in that place, and that place of love. I'm going to leave you with this last story, because I know it's noon, is on one of the ceremonies that I did, and I thought this was an important one, and Bruce said it was an important one. I had taken medicine, and I was sitting out in the universe, and I was holding a feather. And I was out in the universe. I wasn't in this anymore, this earth suit. And I was sitting out there, and I was watching, and I don't know what it is because I'm not an astronomer, but this big cloud of like a explosion. And it was exquisite. It was moving, and it was exploding. And it was just dead silence, in this place. And I was watching this, and I heard a light bing from it and go up. And it said, "This is divine love. We are spiritual beings." And then it was like over, and I was back into my body, and I was like, wow. So that moment of creation, what is the creation? It is the miracle that we all exist, the miracle of how we look, the miracle of the ones that slither, the four-legged, the winged ones, and the sacred. And that's a piece that is always remembers, like, how can we learn to listen and to develop this instead of this? Not instead of this is important, but in this place of holding the place of love. I'm going to do one verse of a song to end it, and I'd like you to sing, or maybe we'll do it. You'll learn the song. This is written by a Vancouver artist, a woman named Yvette, and it goes like this. We are worthy. We are worthy. We are worthy. We are worthy of God's love. Okay, I'm going to get you to sing with me so that you can take this. In one verse, ready? We are worthy. We are worthy. We are worthy. We are worthy of God's love. So just so you know, for that song, because I know the time, it's I am worthy, she is worthy, he is worthy, they are worthy, and we, again, are worthy. So thank you for having me, and I hope some of you stay this afternoon, because we're going to get into it's a participation. I like to do embodied teaching. Here it's a little bit difficult, but this afternoon we're going to do some stuff. So please join us. Thank you.